Hey guys, tonight we're slipping under a heavy patchwork quilt in a dimly lit bedroom somewhere in 19th century England. The air smells faintly of soot and lavender water. A single candle flickers near your bed, casting long, twitching shadows on the floral wallpaper. You hear the stairs creak as someone below makes their final rounds, checking that the coals are banking safely and the windows are latched. You're supposed to be asleep, but you aren't. Instead, you're lying wide awake, stomach full of boiled mutton, mind racing with thoughts of missed letters and that odd lump in the mattress. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog is howling like a ghost. A baby cries. The clock ticks with maddening precision. And here's the kicker: you probably wouldn't survive this. Not the way sleep worked back then. Forget your memory foam pillow and blackout curtains. Sleep in the 1800s was something entirely different. Fragmented, ritualized, and deeply mysterious. For many, it wasn't a gentle drift into dreams, but a nightly battle waged with poultices, powders, and pots of lettuce tea. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps keep these sleepy deep dives coming. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I always read the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a modest Victorian bedroom, nestled inside a tall, thin house with a crooked chimney and draughty windows. The wallpaper is rose-patterned, a little yellowed at the edges. On the nightstand rests a small tin of laudanum, a folded handkerchief, and a brass alarm clock that doesn't ring. It buzzes like a swarm of bees. Outside, the streets of London are barely quiet, carriages still clattering over cobbles long after midnight. And even if you lived in the country, the night wasn't truly silent. Owls called, foxes screamed, and the wind liked to remind you that window panes were optional. For many people in this era, especially in cities, sleep didn't come easily. The idea of a solid, uninterrupted 8-hour block wasn't the norm. People often had what's now called segmented sleep. They'd sleep for a few hours after dusk, wake up for an hour or two, sometimes reading, praying, or even chatting with neighbors, and then drift off again until morning. If that is, they could find sleep at all. Imagine it: you're propped up on a hard mattress filled with straw and horsehair. You've drunk your hot lettuce tea, more on that miracle brew later, and rubbed lavender oil on your temples. But your brain won't turn off. Your legs twitch. The fire pops unexpectedly and makes you jump. Was that something scuttling in the walls? A mouse? Or just the house groaning, as old houses do? You toss. You turn. You sigh so dramatically the cat at your feet lifts its head, squints at you, then flops back down. Welcome to another long, slow battle with the Victorian night. What makes this era particularly interesting is the newness of it all. Just a few decades earlier, people didn't even worry this much about insomnia. It wasn't considered a real problem, just one of those natural rhythms. But as industrialization took hold, the culture of productivity began to creep into everything, even your pillow time. Suddenly, not sleeping became a problem to fix, a weakness to cure, or worse, a moral failing. Historians still argue whether this shift was driven more by medical science, religious guilt, or pure economic pressure. But one thing's clear: once people started believing that not sleeping was bad, they started trying all sorts of things to force sleep back into their lives. You might be a factory worker, your hands stained with grease and soot, trying to drift off while replaying the sound of clanging metal in your skull. Or maybe you're a middle-class lady in a ruffled nightgown, laying in a room that smells faintly of rose water and wet coal, plagued not by noise but by thoughts. So many thoughts. You haven't received a letter from your cousin in India. The lace curtains are uneven. The The servants whispered today. Could they be talking about you? Lying there, your thoughts shift to the contents of the small wooden drawer beside your bed. Inside, a bit of chalky powder, labeled powdered lettuce, in delicate copper plate script. You might mix it into warm water, or if you're feeling fancy, steep it into a kind of tea. Does it work? Probably not, but it's worth a try. The idea that lettuce could bring on sleep wasn't new. It dated back to the Greeks, who noticed that wild lettuce, when cut, exudes a milky sap that resembles opium and has some sedative properties. By the 1800s, lettuce opium, or lactucarium, was sold as a milder, non-addictive sleep aid. Whether it did much is up for debate, but it was cheaper than real opium and didn't come with such a strong risk of, well, dying. You sip it carefully, ignoring the bitter taste, and lay back. Maybe it works. Maybe it's the act of doing something, a ritual that cues your body to calm down. Or maybe it's just warm and bland and boring enough to distract you from the echoes in your mind. Still, your feet are cold. You wiggle them, pull the blanket tighter, and whisper a little prayer, not because you're particularly devout, but because that's what your grandmother did, and she claimed it worked. A little Latin muttered under your breath couldn't hurt. Eventually you begin to feel the drift, not sleep, not yet, but the slipping sensation of your thoughts stretching out like taffy. A phantom itch, a shift in the mattress, that moment when your brain stops thinking in full sentences and starts painting strange, surreal pictures. You're not asleep, not really, but you're close. And in this halfway world of flickering candlelight and half dreams, the night stretches on. You're floating now. Mentally, anyway. Somewhere between memory and dream. The lettuce tea sits warm in your stomach, and your limbs feel like they've been packed in wool. But just as you're starting to drift off, the floorboard groans again. Not a loud noise, but the kind that slices through the stillness of night like a dull knife. Your eyes snap open. It's nothing, just the house settling. You tell yourself that twice. Still, the spell is broken. You lie back and stare at the ceiling. Your mind races again, now with the worst companion of all, the awareness of being awake. You know the one, the feeling of staring at the clock, knowing you've got to be up early. Except there is no digital clock here, only the slow tick of the wall pendulum, or maybe the chime from the church tower 4 blocks away. And this is where you enter the secret club of Victorian Insomniacs. They didn't call it that, of course, but make no mistake, your inability to sleep would have made you part of an entire culture of fidgeting, fretting, tea-brewing night dwellers who search desperately for ways to shut off the noise inside their own skulls. Doctors of the day had a variety of ideas. Most weren't helpful. Some advised strict regimens: go to bed at 9, rise at dawn, no exceptions. If you didn't sleep, get up and read the Bible. Or better yet, copy it out by hand, line by line. If that didn't bore you to sleep, they figured you had bigger problems. Others recommended exercise. Not before bed, no, during the day. You needed to exhaust yourself. Walk 5 miles, scrub the floor, haul firewood, basically be too tired to not sleep. That advice was easier to follow if you weren't already working 12 hours in a match factory. And then came the weirder cures. One booklet from 1832 suggests this regimen: bathe the feet in mustard water, rub the temples with oil of poppy, swallow 10 drops of antimony tincture in sherry wine, then read a moral essay aloud. If you're thinking that sounds like a mad scientist sleepover, you're not alone. Historians still argue whether these elaborate routines were placebo, performance, or genuine attempts at understanding the body's rhythms. What's clear is that people were willing to try anything. Some took to sniffing vinegar-soaked cloths. Others tied dried hops in little cloth pouches and hung them from their bedposts like sleepy talismans. There were even people who believed that laying a Bible under the mattress, particularly the Book of Psalms, would ward off night wanderings of the mind. You shift in your 19th century bed. A rat might be chewing somewhere in the walls, or maybe it's just your imagination. Either way, you tuck your feet tighter beneath the quilt and wonder if it's finally time to light another candle. Instead, your mind drifts sideways to the notion of sleep as a spiritual vulnerability. In this era, some people feared sleep not for its absence, but for what it might let in. Dreams could be omens, spirits could whisper to you. One wrong posture or uncovered toe might invite the devil to perch at your feet. It sounds dramatic until you remember how few people had real scientific answers. This was an age of contradictions, rational medicine evolving right alongside spiritual fear. You could read Darwin at breakfast and still hang garlic by your window at night. And then there were the remedies that crossed the line into full absurdity. One particularly optimistic physician recommended sitting in a room filled with orange peels and singing quietly to yourself. Another suggested that wearing a hat during sleep helped contain the thoughts. Of course, that same doctor also warned against eating tomatoes, which he believed could ferment in the stomach and release restless gases of an emotional sort. It's in this strange soup of belief, superstition, and desperation that you begin to understand how something as simple as a cup of lettuce tea could feel like hope. You sit up again, sighing. Your joints crack. You glance out the small window, just enough moonlight to make out the chimney pots. Somewhere in the alley, a dog is snuffling through scraps. You think of the neighbors, Mr. Little across the street, who reads by lantern until sunrise, Miss Fenwick, who walks her cat at midnight. You're not alone, even if it feels like it. Another trick, rubbing your earlobes, supposedly calms the nerves. It doesn't, but now your fingers are occupied, which counts for something. Eventually, you try lying on your other side, then your back, then stomach. No position feels quite right. The pillow's lumpy, the blanket's too warm now. You push it off, immediately regret it, and drag it back up with great ceremony. The cat groans in protest. Let's not forget the literary angle. Victorian writers were obsessed with insomnia. Charles Dickens walked for miles at night, composing whole chapters of books in his head while London slept. He believed the alignment of his bed was crucial. It had to face north-south, or he wouldn't sleep. Mary Shelley, meanwhile, credited the eerie midnight quiet of her sleepless hours with inspiring Frankenstein. So there's precedent. You're in very dramatic, creative company. But even great minds need rest. And now, again, the thoughts begin to drift. Not in words, but in flashes. You're back in the garden behind your childhood home. You can smell lilacs. You're holding a book you never owned, reading a story you can't quite follow. Your mother is singing something familiar, but her face keeps changing. It's not quite a dream, but it's not quite not one either. You sigh, just as your breathing starts to deepen. The candle flickers once, twice, and then finally goes out. Morning comes whether you want it to or not. And here in the fog-draped corners of a 19th century city, it's less a sunrise and more of a slow gray seeping through the curtains. The fire's long gone out. The room is colder than you remember. Your nose is chilly. Your knees crack like kindling as you swing your legs to the floor, and you think maybe I slept a little. Maybe. Downstairs, the hearth is still smoldering. Someone's left out a heel of bread and a jug of water. You chew absent-mindedly, not even sure if you're hungry or just delaying the start of the day. Because once you're up, the rest begins. There is laundry to beat against stone, letters to post, streets to cross carefully while dodging horses and carts. You squint into the fog, half dreaming still, until you remember something odd from the night before. The lettuce tea did seem to help, a little. It's enough of a memory to send you rummaging for more leaves. Not just lettuce, there's chamomile too, and valerian, and even dried orange blossom if you know where to look. You get the feeling that tea is less a drink here and more of a quiet rebellion, a war on wakefulness brewed by candlelight. And you wouldn't be the only one preparing potions at home. Across town, a widow in a crooked tenement is stirring poppy syrup into her tea, despite the vicar's warnings. Down the block, a cobbler's apprentice wraps a warm stone in flannel and tucks it at the foot of his bed like a pet. In another room, someone is murmuring prayers, not for peace, not for money, but for the simple mercy of uninterrupted sleep. Insomnia, in this world, is not trendy. It's not romantic. It's exhausting. People carry it around like a bruise no one else can see, and they try to hide it, most of the time, because being tired is mistaken for being weak. Even now, historians still argue whether insomnia was ever taken seriously in the Victorian age. Some claim it was dismissed as a lady's complaint, lumped in with hysteria and nervous disorders. Others insist it was recognized early as a true affliction, at least for the wealthy, who could afford doctors willing to take notes and not just sigh heavily. One thing we do know, Victorian doctors wrote a lot of prescriptions for it, and most of them would knock you into next Tuesday. Let's start with chloral hydrate, a little white powder that looked harmless until you realized it could knock a grown man out cold in 10 minutes. Then came barbiturates, then opium-laced cough syrups sold openly at apothecaries, right next to the licorice drops. Even children weren't spared. There were tonics for infant restlessness that would be illegal today. Some contained alcohol. Others included laudanum, a mix of opium and wine. Parents weren't trying to hurt anyone. They just wanted everyone in the house to sleep through the night, including themselves. You think about this as you reheat water in a dented tin kettle. Yours is a gentler brew. Lettuce, yes, but steeped with lemon balm and rose. You're not brave enough for the heavy stuff, and maybe that's a good thing. You can still read a clock. You can still hold a pen. You haven't started arguing with the wallpaper yet. You sip and stare into the steam. Then your eyes drift across the page of an old household guidebook left open on the table. A faint stain, perhaps from elderberry jam, smudges the corner. The advice is printed in fine serifed type. For those afflicted with wakefulness, avoid all music after dark, and instead recite a list of your sins in reverse order of occurrence. Right, that's one way to do it. Sleep, it seems, is never just about the body. It's moral, it's spiritual, it's discipline. And if you can't sleep, clearly you're doing something wrong. Some even blamed architecture. Bedrooms, they said, were too stuffy, or too open, or too crooked in shape. A sloped ceiling could disturb the natural flow of dreams. Others swore that too much wallpaper, especially in floral patterns, could overstimulate the nerves. So yes, your wallpaper is now officially a suspect in your insomnia. A bit further down in the same book, you spot a more unusual suggestion. Sleep may be encouraged by the soft ticking of a metronome, as the mind aligns with its predictable rhythm. This feels oddly modern. You picture a 19th century man winding a clockwork metronome, climbing into bed, and trying to fall asleep to the steady tick-tick of time passing. Not exactly a lullaby, but then again, you've seen stranger things. The days pass, and you settle into a rhythm. Nights are tea and stretching. Evenings are low lamplight and strange rituals. You now keep a thin slice of soap under your pillow, not because it helps, but because someone told you it would, and that's half the battle, isn't it? Belief, the placebo effect wrapped in Victorian linen. Sometimes you sleep, sometimes not. On one of the clearer mornings, you wander to the local herbalist. He's got beet-stained fingers and a hat that looks older than you. He peers at your face and immediately mutters, "Up again last night?" It's not a question, it's a diagnosis. He hands you something wrapped in waxed paper, a blend of hawthorn, dried passion flower, and what might be crushed apricot seed. "Boil this with milk," he says. "Not water? Milk soothes the nerves." You nod, unsure whether this is true or just folklore, but you try it anyway. And again you almost sleep. There's something to be said for persistence. By now, you've started tracking which combinations help and which don't. You've invented your own scale, one for drowsy but panicked, another for calm but wired, and a third for the rare unicorn of slept through till dawn. It's a fragile science, but it's yours. The fire crackles beside you. The city groans outside your window. Carts, footsteps, the echo of hooves against cobblestones, but your breath is slowed. Your teacup is empty. Your eyes are heavy. You're not asleep yet, but you're getting closer. By the time you're 4 weeks deep into your nightly war with wakefulness, something strange starts to happen. Not in your sleep. Oh no, that's still as elusive as ever, but in your relationship with the idea of sleep. It shifts, warms slightly, like a cat that doesn't exactly like you, but stops hissing when you enter the room. You begin to understand what the Victorians already knew. Sleep isn't just a physical process, it's a ritual, a choreography of body, room, and mind. Miss one step, and the whole thing falls apart. And so, like many tired souls before you, you start inventing superstitions. Tonight, for example, you light a candle before bed, but only after you've turned the pillow 3 times clockwise. Why? Because last time you did that, you actually slept. Coincidence? Probably, but you're not risking it. Victorian homes were built on these small rituals. Doors closed in a specific order, bedposts covered with lace to ward off bad humors, a slice of apple on the windowsill for dream spirits. No one truly believed in these things, or rather, no one only believed in them. They were backups, ancient fire drills for the anxious, and anxiety was not in short supply. Imagine the 1800s, after all, as a world where everything is almost modern, but not quite. Railways exist, but they rattle your teeth. Medicine exists, but it's full of alcohol and guesswork. Electric light is on the horizon, but you still rely on whale oil to see your own reflection. That twilight state extends to sleep, too. Science is trying to explain it, but mysticism isn't done with it yet. Case in point, night air. The phrase pops up again and again in household guides and public health pamphlets. People were terrified of it. You read passages warning against opening your window for fear of letting in invisible mists that unsettle the humors and sap the vital spirits. So people sealed their rooms tight. Heavy curtains, draft stoppers, thick tapestries on the walls to trap heat and whatever ghosts might be lurking in the corners. Historians still argue whether fear of night air came from actual disease outbreaks or just old superstition, but either way, people believed it. And belief, when you're this tired, is practically a sedative. You start thinking about other curious methods from the past, like the German doctor who prescribed his patients to lie on cold marble floors for 15 minutes to shock the brain into rest, or the French artist who swore by placing a peeled onion under his bed. Something about vapors calming the nervous system. It didn't work, but he kept doing it anyway. Or take the Victorian trend of sleeping in shifts. That's right, people didn't always sleep straight through the night. In fact, there's decent historical evidence that a large chunk of the population slept in 2 blocks, first sleep and second sleep, with an hour or more of wakefulness in between. Some used this time to pray, others wrote in journals, a few just sat in silence, staring into the hearth, waiting for the second wave of tiredness to hit like a train. You wonder, are you broken or just accidentally time traveling because you wake in the middle of the night too? Not always. but often enough. And when you do, it's not panic, it's almost peaceful, like slipping into an old rhythm, a lull in the storm. You sit with your blanket around your shoulders, tea warming your hands, listening to the creaks of the old walls. The city's finally still. Even the cats are quiet. You feel for once like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. But peace, like everything else in this era, is fleeting. The next day, a neighbor tells you about something new, a sleep cure being offered at a private clinic across town. They use something called galvanism, essentially mild electric shocks, to reset the brain's rhythms. You suppress a shiver. The 19th century really loves its questionable gadgets. But this is no back alley charlatan. The clinic boasts polished brass doorknobs and respectable wallpaper, the kind of place with waiting rooms and pamphlets, and a man in a waistcoat who frowns while writing down your symptoms with the same gravity as a murder confession. You imagine the treatment, wires on your temples, a jolt to the nervous system, and a doctor saying you may experience brief visions of owls. That is normal. Pass. Instead, you take a different route. Literally, you start walking every evening, just long enough to tire your legs, past the bakery with its ever burning oven, past the narrow alley where someone keeps a goose for some reason. You wave to the same 3 chimney sweeps, always covered in soot and always grinning. The city, you realize, is made for walking, for letting your brain unfurl like an old scroll. The Victorians knew this too. Even Charles Dickens, insomnia sufferer extraordinaire, walked the streets of London late into the night, sometimes covering over 20 miles in a single evening. He claimed it cleared his mind, gave him ideas, helped him sleep, though probably not enough. And just like that, you're in good company. Famous authors, anonymous mothers, burned out mill workers, everyone wandering the margins of night, trying to find the off switch in their own way. You're starting to see the humor in it all. The endless search for the right pillow height, the debates over wool versus cotton nightshirts, the miracle cures that taste like minty varnish. It's absurd but so human, so comforting in a way. We've always been like this, anxious minds and tired bodies, trying to fake peace long enough to let the sleep come find us. You make yourself another cup, lettuce again. You hum a tune as you steep it. It's not even about falling asleep anymore. It's about the ritual, the moment, the warmth in your chest and the flicker of light on the wall. You know tonight might be rough, but you also know this. You're not alone. Not now. Not ever. The next evening, you rearrange your room, not dramatically. You don't knock down walls or suddenly adopt minimalism, but something subtle shifts. The bed moves 2 feet left. The chair no longer faces the door. You replace the creaky nightstand with a stacked pile of books. It feels better now, like you're not sleeping in a bedroom, but with it, like the space finally understands what you need. Victorians were obsessed with bedroom arrangement. Not for feng shui reasons, although they'd never call it that, but for health and moral discipline. A well-ordered bedroom, they believed, reflected a well-ordered mind, and when it came to sleep hygiene, they were surprisingly ahead of the curve. Manuals from the mid-1800s advise keeping your room cool, well ventilated, and uncluttered. They warn against sleeping in heavy clothing or under excessive bedding. One physician insists that a feather bed will suffocate the weary soul, which frankly feels dramatic, but you can't deny that simpler tends to sleep better. Your room, after all, isn't just where you rest, it's where your dreams stretch their legs. And if you've ever dreamed in a stuffy, overcrowded space, you'll know how the mind folds in on itself, creating anxious hallways and labyrinthine staircases with no exit. Victorians wrote entire essays about dreams, especially dreams of disorder. They believed the objects in your room could influence them. Too many books? Overactive imagination. A mirror facing the bed? Expect troubling visions. A chamber pot that hasn't been emptied? Well, you can guess. Some went further, claiming that iron bed frames disturbed spiritual energy, and that sleeping with your head facing north invited ghostly interference. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were genuinely widespread or just the quirks of eccentric authors, but they certainly made their way into common lore. Tonight, you light a beeswax candle, as always, but you also add a small saucer of lavender oil near the window. Just a few drops. It's not about the smell, it's about the gesture, the intentional quieting of the senses. You breathe in, hold, exhale. You lie down, and then a creak, of course, the floorboard by the window. And always waits until you're horizontal. It's comforting in a strange way, a reminder that you live here, that you're part of the rhythm of the house, the groans, the sighs, the nighttime symphony of wood and wind. You let your thoughts drift to odd sleep gadgets, for example, because Victorians loved a good contraption. If you ever find yourself at an antique shop and come across a metal clamp with a silk strap and no discernible function, congratulations, you've discovered a 19th century jaw corrector. Supposedly used to keep one's mouth shut during sleep, lest snoring disturb your humors or let in demons through the lips. Not kidding. Then there's the bed rocking frame, designed to gently rock your entire bed like a baby's cradle. Sweet in theory, absolutely terrifying in practice. And don't forget the somnolent helmet, a leather cap filled with herbs, worn like a thinking cap gone rogue. It smelled like an overstuffed pantry and reportedly caused hallucinations. Still, a few Victorians swore by it. You think about how hard people worked to make sleep happen, and how, even with all their rituals and inventions, it still slipped away from them, just like it sometimes slips away from you. It makes you feel oddly connected, and then something changes, not in your body, in the silence. There's a hush that's deeper than quiet, a velvet pause between the ticks of your internal clock. You're not quite asleep, but you're not entirely awake. It's the threshold, that elusive hallway between the door and the dream. And of course, that's when the cat knocks over your cup. The shatter jolts you fully awake. You sit up, heart pounding, tea puddling on the floor, and the cat looking at you like you're the problem. But you can't help but laugh. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. It's exactly how a Victorian insomniac would have felt if a gas lamp sputtered out just as they were slipping into sleep. Defeated, bemused, fully awake. You clean up the mess, start again. The repetition is part of the magic, after all. Sleep is a spiral, not a straight line. You brew another cup, chamomile this time, just for variety, and return to your reorganized bed. You tuck in gently, breathe slower, no candle this time, just for variety, and return to your reorganized bed. You tuck in gently, breathe slower, no candle this time, just darkness and the soft hum of your thoughts. And this time, when your eyes close, something holds. Your breath deepens, your body surrenders. No visions of ghosts or onion vapor dreams tonight. Just quiet. Even your mind stops narrating, at least for a little while. You're not sure what time it is when you wake again, or if you ever fully slept. But there's a thin line of silver light slipping under the curtain, and your back feels like it molded to the exact shape of the mattress. That probably means you got a few hours in. Not perfect, but in the 19th century it would have been normal. Because here's the thing they don't tell you in modern sleep blogs. Victorians didn't expect to sleep in one solid stretch. In fact, many of them practiced segmented sleep. You'd go to bed just after dusk, say 9 a.m., and wake naturally around midnight or 1 a.m. Not from anxiety, not from a crying child, or a late night doom scroll, just because that was your first sleep. Then, for an hour or two, you'd do quiet activities, read, write, pray, sometimes even garden by moonlight. Then you'd go back to bed for your second sleep and rise again with the sun. To a modern ear, that sounds like sleep failure. To a Victorian, it was just Tuesday. They called that middle period the watch, and some people claimed it was their most creative time. Poets wrote verses by candlelight, mothers soothed infants and remembered dreams. Others used it to talk softly with their partners. Historians still argue whether it led to higher birth rates. You think about how different that rhythm feels. Like life made room for sleep instead of stuffing it into the last 6 hours of an overcrowded day. There's something gentle about that, something that lets your breath slow again, even as the cat does a full parkour maneuver off your dresser. But you're up now, and you figure, why not follow the old way? You grab the book by your bed, a reproduction of a Victorian household almanac. You leaf through its yellowed pages until you find a section titled Curatives for the Disturbances of Night. The list is wild. Rub your feet with boiled mustard water. Eat 3 walnuts while reciting Psalm 4. Soak your nightcap in elderflower tincture. Avoid sleeping on your left side during a waning moon. One recipe recommends stuffing a small linen pouch with roasted barley, rose petals, and finely chopped raw lettuce, then placing it on your chest like a sleep sachet. Another suggests whispering a rhyme while stroking a silver spoon across your brow. That one might have been for headaches, but it's hard to tell where superstition ends and sleep begins. Even in serious medical journals of the time, insomnia wasn't just a physical issue, it was a moral failing too. Doctors warned that irregular sleep was a sign of a troubled conscience or excessive self-indulgence. The sleepless are oftentimes those whose minds run unbridled, wrote one particularly judgmental London physician. So, if you're lying awake, it might just mean you're a sinner with too many books. Charming. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some thinkers, especially those influenced by German Romanticism, believed that sleeplessness was sacred, a gift from the divine to dreamers and thinkers. They wrote poems to the night. They painted the stars. They stared out windows and felt that fuzzy edge of awareness as a portal to something larger. So the question becomes, are you broken or chosen? You smile in the dark, hard to say. You could go either way tonight. You walk quietly into the kitchen, fill the kettle again. This time it's not just any tea. You're making one of the strangest, but somehow most popular sleep remedies of the entire 19th century. Lettuce tea. Yes, really. Victorian households, especially in rural areas, believed that boiling lettuce leaves created a gentle sedative. Not iceberg, more like wild romaine or cause lettuce. You'd boil it for a good 10 minutes until the water turned greenish gold, then strain and sip. Some recipes added honey or clove to mask the flavor. Some suggested you whisper a blessing over the cup, and a few more medically minded ones insisted you should only use the core of the lettuce, not the leaves, because that's where the strongest effect lived. Modern science, for what it's worth, has found trace amounts of lactocarium, a kind of mild opiate-like compound, in wild lettuce sap, but you'd need a bushel of the stuff to feel anything beyond placebo. Still, there's something comforting about the ritual. You boil, pour, and cradle the mug like a sleeping infant. You sniff, it smells like spinach water. You sip, and it tastes deeply unconvincing. But it's not about the taste, it's about the gesture, the signal to your body that you're winding down again, that second sleep is welcome, that you're not fighting your rhythm anymore, but riding it. You leave the mug half finished, pad softly back to bed, and once again the quiet gathers, not heavy or urgent, but gentle, like a wool coat in winter. You nestle into it. Let your eyes blur. Let your thoughts soften like dough. And as you fade, you wonder, what will your dreams be tonight? Will they be filled with Victorian staircases and candlelit gardens? Will lettuce leaves talk to you, or will you dream nothing at all? Just soft darkness and the creak of floorboards. When you next stir, the birds are just beginning to warble, not the full choir of dawn, but a few scattered soloists tuning up in the trees. Your room is still dim, with that purplish hue the sky wears just before sunrise. You don't know exactly how long you've been asleep, but your limbs are heavy and warm, and the blanket seems fused to your body. So far, so good. If you were living in 1850, this would be your second waking, the natural end of your segmented sleep. You might swing your legs out of bed now, stretch and start the fire, but here in the soft half dark, you linger. Let the moment breathe. Your thoughts drift, not toward tasks or goals, but toward one of the more obscure footnotes of sleep history, the Victorian obsession with nightcaps. Not the kind with whiskey or rum, though those were certainly around. We're talking about actual, literal caps for your head. Men, women, and children all wore them. Long, cone-shaped cotton or woolen bonnets tied under the chin, like something out of a cartoon. And these weren't just a style choice. No, the belief was that covering your head at night helped preserve body heat and protect you from night vapors. That phrase again, night vapors. The Victorian explanation for just about everything they didn't like. Coughs, night vapors. Dizziness, definitely vapors. Women getting ideas, super dangerous vapors. Some nightcaps were plain, others were quite elaborate, embroidered with lace or stitched with family crests. And there were strict rules. Women's caps were frilly and delicate. Men's were rugged and long, often with a tassel at the end that somehow added masculinity. They weren't just fashion, they were health wear. See, the Victorian sleep environment wasn't exactly cozy by modern standards. Bedrooms were drafty, with single-pane windows and little insulation. Fires were expensive and hard to maintain all night. Electric blankets didn't exist, so people bundled up like they were crossing the Alps just to go to bed. 2 or 3 quilts, thick wool socks, gloves sometimes, and yes, always the nightcap. Some even believed that exposing your head at night could let spirits in or allow your dreams to leak out. That's right, your dreams, floating off like steam unless properly capped. You smile at that image, a dream escaping like a balloon, tethered only by a bit of ribbon and a woolen hat. Of course, nightcaps eventually fell out of fashion. By the early 20th century, central heating made them unnecessary, and perhaps more importantly, photographs became common, and no one wanted to be caught looking like a sad elf in their family album. But part of you wonders, were they onto something? Not just in terms of warmth, but ritual. Slipping on a cap, tying the little ribbon, wrapping your head in quiet. It signals the brain, we're done thinking now. Just as a teacup says we're ready to relax, and pulling down the blinds says no more interruptions. In the same vein, Victorians often had elaborate nighttime routines. They'd wash their faces with lavender water, brush their hair exactly 100 times, wind their clocks, check their chamber pots, and this is true, they might consult a dream book kept at the bedside. These little almanacs told you what your dreams meant. Saw a fish, good luck. Dreamed of fire, a quarrel's coming. Dreamed of fire, a quarrel's coming. Fell off a cliff, someone's jealous of your success. It was half psychology, half folklore, and people treated them like gospel. The idea was, your dreams weren't random, they were messages, and if you learned to read them properly, you could guide your life. Historians still argue whether this practice genuinely influenced behavior or if it was more like a party game. But either way, it shows how deeply tied sleep was to meaning. It wasn't just a time when your body shut off. It was a space where your mind whispered secrets, and Victorians leaned in to listen. You settle into your pillow again. You don't have a dream book, but you do try to hold on to a flicker of the one you just left. There was a field, some kind of tower, a dog with human eyes. It slips away as dreams do, trailing the scent of something almost profound. You let it go. There's a breeze coming in through the window now, gentle and cool, the kind of air that makes you pull the blanket tighter, but not close it off entirely. You adjust your head on the pillow, eyes closed, body still, and you think if they could bottle this feeling, it'd sell out in an hour. Not the sleep itself, but the edge of it. That soft, slow curtain between one world and another, where nothing matters too much, where you don't have to try, where you're held. Some Victorians believed sleep was a cousin of death. Others said it was proof of the soul's journey. A few claimed you traveled to real places in your dreams, worlds as physical and solid as your waking one, only unreachable during the day. You wonder what they'd say about the dreams you've had, or about the way sleep feels now, in a world buzzing with blue light and endless noise, yet still, at its core, governed by the same rhythms. The sun continues to rise. The room shifts from purple to pale gold. And for now, just for now, you remain between, wrapped in warmth, breathing slow, not quite awake, not quite gone. You hear a faint creak, the kind that could be a floorboard or just the bones of the house settling. For a moment, your brain scans it, considers whether to fully wake up, and then lets it go. You're drifting again. Somewhere in the middle of this sleepy time fog, you find yourself in the drawing room of a Victorian townhouse, under low candlelight, surrounded by the rustle of starched fabric and the faint aroma of burnt sugar and damp wool. But you're not alone. In fact, you've come to visit one of the era's more curious characters, a professional sleep consultant. Yes, even in the 19th century, people were paying good money to be told how to go to sleep better. They weren't called coaches or influencers back then, of course. Instead, they might be doctors of phrenology, mesmerists, or even spiritualists, people who blended science, pseudoscience, and a healthy dose of charm to treat the sleepless with all the flair of a Victorian seance. Their advice ranged from the sensible to the eyebrow-raising. Let's start with the sensible. A common recommendation was to ensure evening airflow. Open your window just a crack, even in winter. Fresh air, they believed, sweeps the humors clean. They weren't far off, really. Modern research says cooler, oxygen-rich rooms do help sleep. They'd also suggest moderate exercise before dusk, a stroll, a bit of gentle gardening. One magazine warned against excessive conversation or arithmetic after dinner, which honestly feels like solid advice. But then there was the quirky fringe. Some sleep consultants swore by magnetized water. You'd leave your water jug out overnight with a magnet strapped to it, supposedly drawing out negative sleep-interrupting energy. Others suggested pressing your bare feet to the ground before bed to reconnect with the Earth's electric slumber pulse. Sound familiar? Modern earthing claims are basically the same thing with more hashtags. Even stranger were the animal aura theories. One London practitioner claimed that letting a cat sleep near your head would harmonize your brainwaves, thanks to the feline lunar field. Yes, that's right, Victorian sleep therapy, brought to you by purring and pseudoscience. Historians still argue whether these consultants genuinely believed their claims or were simply excellent at monetizing the upper class's anxieties. Probably a bit of both, because by the mid-1800s, insomnia had become a fashionable affliction. The sleepless weren't just tired, they were seen as interesting, sensitive, complex, artists, thinkers, troubled geniuses. To sleep too well implied dullness. You were too content, too normal. But if you tossed and turned, stared long into the hearth, and wrote poetry at 2 a.m., that was the mark of a soul too deep for peace. You might even keep a wakefulness journal. Yes, an actual little book to record what you thought about while not sleeping. Some are filled with spiritual reflections, others with melancholic lists of regrets or records of birdsong at 4 a.m. A few have simple entries, like woke at 1:13, thought of mother's hair, slept again, dreamed of a flooded orchard. That's it, a postcard from the mind's nighttime wanderings. You shift under your covers now, half amused, half impressed. Even their insomnia had aesthetics. And into this space, the fashionable problem of not sleeping stepped a whole market of products and cures. We've already talked about lettuce tea and mechanical sleep aids, but let's introduce one more now: somnopathy beds. Imagine a bed that vibrates gently, not like a seedy motel's coin-op mattress, but with a slow pulsing hum, powered by hidden gears and weighted springs. These were real, sold as scientific marvels. They claimed to rock the body into equilibrium and soothe cerebral tension. Some came with copper coils to conduct healing energy. The earliest versions were hand cranked by servants, which raises questions about just how relaxing it is to be rocked to sleep by a guy named Thomas, silently turning a crank in the corner. But for some Victorians, sleep wasn't a passive experience. It was something to pursue, measure, and improve. They made charts. They wrote in their sleep diaries in exacting script. Some even kept waking tables, tracking the precise minute they rose, how many times they turned in the night, and what thoughts they had during their periods of wakefulness. In fact, one woman in 1872 cataloged her nightly experience for 6 full years, noting not just dreams, but ambient smells, pillow condition, and spiritual atmosphere. Spiritual atmosphere. How's that for commitment? You smile again softly. You've never tracked your pillow's energy level, but maybe you're missing out. Still, it's oddly comforting, knowing that people 150 years ago were lying in their beds, wondering why they couldn't fall asleep, trying chamomile and sea air, blaming their mattress, blaming themselves, trying everything, just like you. Because here's the truth: nobody really understands sleep. Not fully, not yet. Modern neuroscience has theories, models, stages. We've mapped brainwaves and REM cycles. We've identified circadian rhythms and sleep debt and melatonin pathways. But at its heart, sleep remains a mystery, a surrender, a place your body takes you when your mind finally lets go. And Victorian sleep consultants, wacky as they sometimes were, understood this instinctively. Their rituals, their dream journals, their velvet-infused herbal compresses, all of it was designed not just to trick the body, but to reassure the spirit. They weren't just seeking sleep, they were seeking safety. You turn now, gently. The blanket shifts with you. Outside, the breeze moves again, and a distant bird calls, a low trill from somewhere deep in a tree. You let the sound pass through you like fog. You're not recording it, just receiving. No journal, no magnetized water, just you, here, now. You're still floating somewhere in that cozy twilight between awareness and dreams. Your limbs are heavy in the best possible way, like velvet sacks of warm sand. And now the scene drifts again. We're still in the 19th century, but the walls around you are lined with bottles, hundreds of them. Some amber glass, some clear, each one carefully labeled in ornate script. Welcome to the world of Victorian patent sleep remedies. If the sleep consultants were the lifestyle coaches of the era, these bottles were the over-the-counter hope merchants, sold in apothecaries, post offices, traveling medicine shows, even door to door. These so-called cures offered immediate, if questionable, results for the weary and desperate. You reach for one. Dr. Itherley's Night Balm, the label reads. Promises: no dreams, no twitching, no inner rattlings of the nerves. Inner rattlings? Honestly, same. Let's break down what was actually inside these charmingly ominous vials, because spoiler alert, this stuff was potent. Many of the most popular sleep potions contained opium, usually in the form of laudanum, a tincture of alcohol and powdered opium. Just a few drops in your nightly tea, or taken straight from the spoon, and voila, a heavy fuzzy slide into unconsciousness. One of the best-selling formulas was Godfrey's cordial, which combined opium, molasses, and sassafras, marketed mostly to mothers for calming fussy babies. Yep, opium for babies. That happened. Then there was chloral hydrate, introduced in the 1860s and quickly hailed as a miracle sedative. It was colorless, tasteless, and mixed easily into drinks. The Victorians called it knockout drops. Sounds comforting, doesn't it? Another favorite, bromide salts, especially potassium bromide. These were considered nerve soothers and were handed out to the sleepless, the anxious, and slightly more questionably to women deemed hysterical. Historians still argue whether these widespread chemical cures were a reflection of legitimate medical progress or just a band-aid over the deepening anxieties of industrial life. After all, by the late 1800s, city dwellers were grappling with new kinds of stress: noise, pollution, overwork, and the relentless tick of clocks. What better antidote than a sleep syrup that erased it all? And make no mistake, some of these remedies worked, just not safely. Dependency was common, so were overdoses, but regulation was minimal, so most Victorians had no idea what they were actually ingesting. They just wanted rest. Still do. Of course, not all sleep remedies were chemical. Some preferred herbal concoctions, especially among rural families and traditional healers. Elderflower, hops, passion flower, and of course our old friend lettuce. These ingredients were brewed into teas or infused in oils and rubbed onto the temples at night. There was even a belief in sleep herbs under the pillow. Think of it like an olfactory security blanket. Little pouches filled with dried lavender, lemon balm, rose petals, or chamomile were slipped between the linens. The idea was that the scent alone could usher in sleep. Whether or not the herbs actually caused drowsiness is up for debate, but the ritual of preparing them, choosing the blend, fluffing the pillow, and tucking them into place, there's a gentle power in that kind of bedtime ceremony. And speaking of ceremony, let's not forget the sleep elixirs with truly bizarre ingredients. You'll love this one. Dr. Merton's Slumber Elixir, an actual product, contained tincture of valerian, sugar syrup, and beaver gland extract. That's right, castoreum, from glands located near the beaver's tail, supposedly to invoke the calm of nature's most industrious sleeper. Imagine buying a bottle of animal gland juice just to conk out. Oh, and another popular remedy? Snake oil. Real snakes boiled down and combined with menthol and eucalyptus, then rubbed on the temples or behind the ears. Sleep-inducing? Maybe not, but it tingled, so people assumed it must be working. At the heart of it all was a deep truth. People would try anything to fall asleep, especially when it's been days, especially when your thoughts feel like an avalanche, especially when you're just so tired. Which brings us to a little-known relic from the 1800s, the dream pot. It's essentially a small vessel, clay or ceramic, placed on the bedside table. Into it you'd place a mix of herbs, a crystal or two, sometimes even a scrap of a loved one's clothing. The belief that dreams would be caught, guided, or improved by the energies in the pot. A few even wrote instructions to their dreams and placed them inside. Notes like please bring memories of my father, show me the garden from my childhood, no nightmares tonight. Heartbreaking, isn't it? And kind of beautiful, because that's really what this all comes down to. Not just sleep, but what happens inside it. Dreams, the hope for peace, for messages, for closure, for escape. Victorian advertisements didn't just sell sleep, they sold reunion with the dead, clarity of the soul, and the possibility that just maybe the part of your mind too cluttered to rest during the day could find its voice in the dark. You're still with me, but your eyelids are heavier now. Maybe you've already drifted and returned once or twice. That's okay. That's the point. There's no snake oil here. No ether-laced cordial, just the rhythm of words, the slow folding of time, the gentle reminder that people long before you have sat up at 2 a.m., tried one more trick, and whispered to themselves, "Please, just let me rest." And maybe they did. Maybe you will too. Still here? Good. Or maybe only half here, which is just the right amount. As your breath slows and your thoughts soften at the edges, the story continues without needing your full attention. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to chase it. It gently walks beside you. Now, picture a bedroom, not yours, but a modest, well-kept room in an English townhome circa 1887. Floral wallpaper, lace curtains, a faint scent of beeswax, and old linens. In the bed lies a woman named Emily Thorpe, propped up with pillows, eyes wide open. It's been 4 nights since she last slept more than an hour. Her doctor recommended milk with nutmeg, but she's beyond that. Tonight, she's trying the sleep diary. It was part of a short-lived therapeutic trend at the end of the 19th century, rooted in the early field of self-analysis, a precursor to modern cognitive behavioral therapy. The method: write down your thoughts, fears, and obsessions every night until the mind is emptied of its burdens. Some diarists wrote about missed social calls, others about the fear of death, of being forgotten, of growing old alone. Often pages were filled with repeated phrases, over and over again, like mantras born from exhaustion. I must not think about the chimney. I will not imagine the black dog. Sleep will come. Sleep will come. Sleep will come. Historians still argue whether this was a legitimate medical strategy or simply a placebo, a kind of verbal purging that tricked the brain into calming down. But many Victorians swore by it, and even more intriguing were the illustrated dream journals that followed. By the morning, those who slept, no matter how briefly, would record what they saw. Some entries were whimsical, like talking horses and floating castles. Others were deeply unsettling. One woman described a dream in which her house had no doors, only mirrors. Of course, dream tracking wasn't a Victorian invention. It had roots in ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures. But in the 1800s, it was suddenly viewed through a scientific lens, with physicians attempting to catalog dreams for meaning, even trying to map patterns across patients. There were even books, handwritten and privately circulated, that served as dream dictionaries. They included entries like falling into water, a sign of unresolved guilt; teeth crumbling, fear of poverty or decay; a figure in a green coat, a warning of illness. A man named Dr. Augustus Wolverton published an anonymous pamphlet in 1873 titled Night Symbols and Nervous Agitations, claiming that dreams were the key to insomnia's cause, not just its byproduct. His theory, that the conscious mind didn't want sleep because it feared what it might see. Quirky as that sounds, there's something hauntingly plausible about it. Meanwhile, another offbeat method of dream management emerged among spiritual circles: mirror rituals. Practitioners believed that staring into a mirror by candlelight just before bed could either invite soothing visions or scare away nightmares. The instructions varied. Some said to whisper your name 3 times. Others required placing a silver coin at the base of the mirror and asking it to reflect only gentleness. Some people kept small covered mirrors beside the bed to trap nightmares that might float by in the night air. It's hard not to admire the creativity of these rituals, even if they veer into the whimsical. But then again, when you're awake at 3:12 a.m. and everything feels impossible, what wouldn't you try? Still, many Victorians turned not to dreams, but to music. Yes, the 19th century had its version of sleep playlists, albeit played on upright pianos or tiny music boxes. Gentle lullabies, often composed in 3/4 time, were considered particularly effective. Waltz rhythms apparently mimic the heartbeat during restful sleep. Try not to hear that now as you drift. 123, 123. If you were wealthy, you might own a Regina music box, a large ornate device that played metal discs etched with lullabies or popular chamber tunes. More modest homes settled for wind-up versions, playing a tinny melody that faded as the gears unwound. There was one composition that rose to peculiar fame, the Sleep Waltz, written by a minor German composer named Karl Prellwitz. It was rumored that his wife fell asleep every time he played it, like immediately. The sheet music sold thousands of copies. A few years later, people began to joke that the piece was too effective, causing drowsiness in listeners regardless of time of day. Historians still argue whether this was clever marketing or placebo-induced folklore. But if a dusty piano piece helped one overworked baker or mourning widow find rest, did it really matter? Sometimes the music wasn't external at all. Some insomniacs were encouraged to hum themselves to sleep, a soft, repetitive vibration in the chest that calmed the nervous system. Others learned to mimic the sounds of nature, wind through leaves, distant thunder, a gently bubbling brook. One woman in her sleep diary wrote that she imagined the sound of rain falling on stone steps. It's always the same rain, she wrote. It knows where I'm hiding, and it sings me into hiding too. Which brings us to something rather poetic, the rain simulators of the 1890s. Yes, they existed. Engineers and inventors, especially in France and Germany, designed crude mechanical devices that mimicked the sound of rain. Using metal beads, spinning drums, and even clock gears, they produced a steady hiss or pitter-patter like water on rooftops. Some were sold commercially under names like Ploe de Nuit or Snoer Glutzen, a rough Dutch-German blend meaning sleep rustle. These machines were fragile and expensive, but those who owned them often described them as life-changing. That hum you might hear from your fan right now. A whisper of these earlier contraptions, built by people who knew that silence, paradoxically, was sometimes too loud to sleep in. So tonight, as you lie back, imagine one of those strange little rain boxes humming quietly in the corner. Hear the rhythm, feel it blend into the gentle thud of your heartbeat. Let the dream pots shimmer on the windowsill. Let the mirror reflect only peace, because you're still part of their story, the quiet ones who tried every night to chase sleep gently into their arms. Somewhere along the path of your mind tonight, you wander into a garden. It's overgrown, fragrant and dimly lit by gaslight flickering from a brass lamp just outside a curtained window. You're not supposed to be out here, but that's half the charm. This is a hospital garden, not for emergencies or operations, but for one of the strangest and gentlest medical experiments of the late 1800s, the sleep cure clinics that began to appear in select parts of Europe and North America. Imagine this. You're prescribed not pills, but an environment. You're sent to a countryside estate or a special wing of a hospital with strict instructions to do one thing and one thing only: sleep. Or at least pretend to. No stress, no visitors, no books, no letters. Meals are bland. Walks are allowed, but only on shaded paths. You're encouraged to nap at any time, but the real goal is to retrain your nervous system through sheer exposure to silence and repetition. It all stemmed from the work of a few curious minds who believed that insomnia wasn't a defect, but a form of mental shock, that it could be undone, not by force, but by softness. The most famous of these was Dr. George Miller Beard, a New York physician who coined the term neurasthenia, what we might now consider burnout or anxiety. His solution: sleep treatment. He believed modern life had overwhelmed the senses, and the only cure was removal from civilization's burdens. Historians still argue whether Beard's theories were proto-psychiatry or simply rebranded elitism. After all, his patients were usually wealthy enough to take months off and retreat into sleep-focused sanitariums. But others took his ideas and ran with them. In Germany, A woman named Greta Weiss opened a tiny sleep farm just outside Berlin. Her theory was that poor sleep came not from modernity, but from disconnection from the land. Her patients, mostly women, slept in haylofts, drank warm goat's milk, and listened to roosters as a natural alarm clock. Quirky? Absolutely, but Greta claimed over 80% of her visitors left with restored sleep, and several published testimonials swore by her methods. One described her week at the farm as a return to the sleep of girlhood, dreamless and deep. Of course, not all sleep retreats were so idyllic. Some clinics adopted more clinical routines. Patients were made to lie still for hours, wrapped tightly in woolen blankets, often in near darkness. This technique, known as enforced rest, was said to shock the system back into balance. But let's be honest, it sounds more like medieval spa torture than healing. One hospital even had rooms that mimicked caves, complete with dripping water sounds and rough stone walls. These were called return to nature chambers, and the theory was that since humans once slept in caves, the primal memory might help override modern anxiety. Modern historians mostly file these treatments under experimental curiosity, but they speak volumes about how seriously the 19th century began to treat sleeplessness, not as laziness, but as a condition worthy of compassion. Then, there was the curious intersection of insomnia and art. Painters, poets, and composers of the time often credited their work to sleepless nights. The romantic ideal of the tortured, wakeful genius became so fashionable that some people even faked insomnia to seem more creative. A young poet named Louisa Templeton once wrote to her publisher, "I did not sleep at all last week. I stayed up listening to the walls breathe and wrote a sonnet to the ticking of the stair clock." The poem? Not great, but the aesthetic? Flawless. There was even a fashion movement called the sleepless look. Pale skin, dark under eyes, loose-fitting gowns that gave off a dreamy, disheveled appearance. Basically, Victorian glam goth meets sleep-deprived influencer. The irony? Many of these sleep-starved artists were behind the scenes, chugging every soporific they could find. Valerian root, lettuce tea, laudanum tinctures. One pianist allegedly dipped her wrists in lavender oil so frequently that her skin turned slightly purple. There was one odd little cultural relic that survived the period, the sleep bonnet. Originally meant to preserve hairstyles or offer warmth, by the 1890s, some were made specifically for anxious sleepers. They were stuffed with herbs, lavender, hops, chamomile, and tied snugly under the chin. Think of it as a sleepy aromatherapy helmet. Did it work? Probably not, but there's something comforting in the image of a person quietly tying on their hope for rest. And then let's take a brief pause here. There's the story of Reverend Amos Bell. Bell was a small-town preacher in rural Vermont, and he suffered from such chronic insomnia that he began delivering midnight sermons to his sheep. Real sheep. He'd walk out into the pasture, Bible in hand, and read softly to them under the stars. Neighbors thought he'd lost his mind, but here's the twist. Within a month, he was sleeping 5 hours a night. He claimed the practice helped him unburden himself in a setting free from judgment. Word spread. Some said his sheep became more devout. Others just called it rural eccentricity. Historians still argue whether Bell was ahead of his time or just extremely lonely. But either way, he found peace where he could, and who's to say that's not sacred? That's the undercurrent running through so much of the 19th century sleep story. People trying to build little sanctuaries, sleep gardens, music boxes, quiet farms, pulpit meadow hybrids, anything to hush the brain and welcome back the gentle dark. And it's here, in these soft experiments, that you find yourself tonight, wrapped in a kind of historical comfort, somewhere between oddity and tenderness, the kind of place where someone would hand you a cup of warm lemon water, tuck a lavender sachet beside your pillow, and gently suggest, "Try again, darling. This time sleep might say yes." By now you're settled. The room around you has quieted. Your thoughts, once tangling like vines, have begun to loosen. And still, the past keeps unfolding like a worn quilt stitched with strange details, soft absurdities, and forgotten truths. Tonight, you've learned about lettuce tea, sleep bonnets, and Victorian cave chambers. But one key element of the 19th century sleep puzzle remains: technology. You might assume that the pre electric world was a haven for rest, candles, fireplaces, gentle darkness. But don't romanticize too quickly. This was the century of the Industrial Revolution, after all, and with it came machines, trains, clocks, and above all, noise. Suddenly, people living in cities couldn't rely on natural silence. Steam whistles pierced the early morning, newspaper boys shouted at dawn, gas lamps hissed, and the newly paved roads echoed with iron rimmed wheels. For the first time in history, people began complaining, not just that they couldn't sleep, but that the world wouldn't let them. Inventors leapt in to try and help. Enter the somnophone, a delightfully odd contraption patented in 1878. The somnophone claimed to use musical vibrations to lull the nervous system. Picture a phonograph, but instead of records, it played custom wax cylinders of rainfall, wind, and chimes. Basically, the original white noise machine. Problem was, it was bulky, needed constant cranking, and sometimes the wax melted in summer. One woman reportedly woke to the smell of burning beeswax and thought she'd dreamed of a beehive fire. She hadn't. Another enterprising gentleman in Boston tried something more practical: the pillow harmonica. It was exactly what it sounds like: an insertable harmonica in your pillow that would play gentle tones as you exhaled through the night. Historians still argue whether he was a genius or had simply inhaled too much opium while sewing prototypes. There was also the strange case of the glow paint headboard. In an attempt to make the transition from candlelight to sleep less jarring, some upper-class households began applying phosphorescent paint to bed frames. It would emit a soft green glow for an hour or two after lights out. The idea: let the room gently dim itself like a sunset. The side effect? Some people reported hallucinations of glowing limbs or ghost arms floating in the dark. One terrified child claimed her bed was breathing. The trend did not last. More sensible remedies came from the world of timed mechanical aids. Clockmakers began building what were called sleep regulators. These were ornate brass clocks with multiple dials, one for time, one for ambient noise, one for aromatics. At 10:30 p.m., the machine would release a puff of lavender steam. At 10:45, a music box would play a lullaby. At 11, a chime would signal lights out. It was a bedtime ritual in gears and springs. The wealthy commissioned custom regulators, engraved with poetry, adorned with figurines of sleeping cherubs. The less affluent made do with hand-wound music boxes, or simply hung lavender bundles from the rafters. And for the scientifically inclined, there were sleep studies. In 1882, a London physician named Dr. Henry Beddoe ran one of the first formal sleep experiments. He built a chamber insulated with cork, covered in wool, and cooled with blocks of ice. He claimed to have created perfect sleeping air, a mixture of low temperature, high humidity, and absolute silence. He then recruited 10 insomniacs and had them sleep there for a week. Results were mixed. Some reported deep sleep. One simply wandered off and never came back. Another insisted the room made him dream of drowning. Dr. Beddoe's work was never widely replicated, but his meticulous notes offer a glimpse into the lengths people were willing to go. A favorite fringe detail? One sleep enthusiast of the era swore by placing a small potato in each sock. His theory: potatoes draw out toxins through the feet and induce drowsiness. Modern science disagrees. But hey, no one ever said dreams had to be logical. All of this, the clocks, the harmonicas, the ghostly headboards, points to a broader cultural shift. Sleep had gone from being a passive act to a pursuit, something to be managed, cultivated, even engineered. This is also the era when sleep tracking first emerged. Wealthy Victorians, obsessed with self improvement, kept sleep journals, pages upon pages detailing the hour they retired, how many dreams they remembered, what they ate before bed, even the position of the moon. One woman, Lady Agatha Whittlesey, reportedly blamed her poor rest on a waxing gibbous and refused to sleep indoors on those nights, preferring a chaise longue in her conservatory, wrapped in bear pelts. "The stars lull me," she once wrote. "The ceiling judges me." There's something deeply human in all of this. The belief that with the right tools or habits or herbs, you might coax sleep into your arms like a shy cat, that you could chase it down with a harmonica or tame it with lavender clocks. And amidst all the tools and theories, the core anxiety remained. What if I never sleep again? That fear is timeless. You know it too well. The feeling that maybe tonight will be the night your body forgets how to rest. But the Victorians, for all their eccentricities, responded not with panic, but with ritual. They brewed their tea, combed their hair exactly 40 times, wrapped their heads in perfumed linen, and told themselves stories. Stories like this one. And here you are, over 100 years later, still listening, still hoping, still chasing the silence between your thoughts. But maybe, just maybe, you don't need to chase anything. Maybe you're already closer to rest than you think. Because if a 19th century reverend can find peace under the stars, reading to sheep, and if someone can sleep better with a potato in their sock, then surely, you're allowed to relax tonight too. You stir slightly, perhaps shifting your weight or adjusting your blanket, but the story continues its slow, deliberate march through time, like an old train pulling gently through a fog-draped countryside. And now we arrive at the quieter corners of sleep culture, bedroom architecture and personal sleep spaces of the 19th century. Let's talk about where people actually slept. The default image you might have is a big wooden bed in a chilly upstairs room, maybe with a chamber pot underneath and a fireplace crackling at the far end. And that image isn't wrong, but the truth, of course, was a bit more layered. In Victorian cities, especially London, New York, and Paris, bedrooms were becoming miniature worlds of performance, especially among the wealthy. The bed itself was no longer just a piece of furniture, it was a stage, sometimes literally. Take the phenomenon of the bed alcove. Inspired by French design, these were recessed sleeping spaces framed with drapes or sliding doors. At night, the curtains would close, cocooning the sleeper like a theatrical act about to begin. During the day, the bed might disappear entirely behind a velvet curtain, lest your guests be scandalized by a glimpse of rumpled linens. Historians still debate whether this trend was about hygiene, privacy, or simply fashion. But one thing's clear, the bed was no longer just a place to rest. It was something to curate. And then there were the personal sleep objects. You might think of these as the 19th century equivalent of a weighted blanket or white noise app. One popular item, the sleeping brick, a flat stone wrapped in flannel and warmed by the fire, slipped between the sheets. It preheated your bed before you slid in. Some even had embossed floral patterns, like a ceramic tea set for your toes. For the especially chilly nights, people employed bed wagons, small trays or baskets filled with glowing coals, placed under the bed to heat the air around it. Safer than an open flame, though not without risk. One diary recounts how a maid accidentally set fire to the mattress and was scolded, not for the fire, but for ruining an expensive down comforter. That's Victorian priorities for you. But not all sleepers had the luxury of warmed bricks and privacy curtains. For the working class, sleep was a matter of necessity, not aesthetics. Entire families might share one bed, or even just one room, if they were lucky. Siblings slept head to toe, parents tucked their babies into drawers, lodgers paid by the night to rest on shared straw pallets. And yet, even in cramped quarters, people found ways to mark bedtime with ritual. A sip of milk, a murmured prayer, a favorite shawl laid just so. One oddity of urban life was the rise of wakeful neighbors. In tenement buildings, walls were thin and lives overlapped. It wasn't unusual to hear someone softly singing across the plaster or reciting psalms aloud until they nodded off. Some actually found comfort in this, like sleep by osmosis. If your neighbor was already halfway to dreamland, maybe you could hitch a ride on their rhythm. And here's a delightful fringe detail. In parts of Eastern Europe and some immigrant neighborhoods in New York, it was common to employ a night talker. This was a person, often an elder, who would quietly tell stories or recite folklore for a few pennies a night, sitting near your room, especially for children or nervous adults. A living podcast, if you will. Victorian boarding houses sometimes advertise this feature as a selling point. Cozy quarters, warm supper, and Aunt Rella tells tales till you drift. Now, let's zoom out again. At the societal level, sleep was becoming gendered. Women's sleep was viewed as fragile, poetic, even symbolic of moral purity. Men's sleep was tied to strength and labor. This led to wildly different advice columns. Women were encouraged to use rosewater spritzes to avoid agitating novels before bed, and to consider linen soaked in chamomile as eye masks. Men, on the other hand, were told to walk briskly after dinner, avoid alcohol after dusk, and never dream more than thrice per week. Yes, apparently dream quotas were a thing, or at least some doctors thought they should be. The underlying assumption that women needed protection from their thoughts, while men had to regulate theirs like steam engines. Historians still argue whether these sleep stereotypes shaped larger health outcomes or simply mirrored the existing gender norms of the era. Either way, bedtime had become another theater for Victorian ideals, and then there were the wealthy eccentrics. Every century has them, but in the 19th, these folks really went all in. One aristocrat, Lord Thistlewhim, insisted on sleeping in a gold-lined tent within his own bedroom, claiming the sound of canvas flapping helped him sleep. Another, Lady Penelope Barron, slept on a marble slab for spinal symmetry, surrounded by 6 ticking clocks so she could always know where her dreams were anchored in time. Don't try that at home, but perhaps the most charming bedtime indulgence belonged to a retired sea captain named Jonas Clark, who built a miniature lighthouse in his garden. Each night, he'd light the oil lamp, then climb into bed beside an open window and fall asleep watching the gentle flicker. "The sea still calls," he wrote, "but I answer now from dreams." It's easy to laugh at these rituals, but look closer and you'll see yourself. Because aren't you doing the same, finding little ways to coax your body into stillness, setting up a fan, adjusting the covers just so, replaying a favorite memory or sound? That desire for comfort, for safety, for softness is eternal, and while your surroundings may be electric and modern, your needs are ancient. You seek the same thing as that factory girl in her crowded tenement, the noblewoman behind velvet curtains, the sailor watching his lighthouse glow. You want a place to let go, so here you are, eyes soft, breath slow, the story still weaving gently around you. Let it take you a little deeper. The candle flickers lower now, just a stub of quiet light in the fog of night. And your mind, lulled by all these strange old customs, floats gently into the final chambers of this journey. But don't let go just yet. There's one more layer of the 19th century sleep world to explore. Let's wander into the realm of remedies and recipes. You've probably heard of warm milk before bed. That one's lasted through the centuries. But the Victorians were connoisseurs of bedtime concoctions, herbal infusions, syrups, poultices, tinctures, and yes, even lettuce tea. Yes, you heard that right. Lettuce. Good old leafy greens, not just for sandwiches anymore. Lectuca virosa, or wild lettuce, was believed to have mild sedative effects. Folk wisdom claimed that steeping its leaves in boiling water produced a calming brew. Supposedly, it helped with anxiety, indigestion, and night terrors. Did it work? Historians still argue whether this herbal remedy had real pharmacological impact or simply functioned as a placebo served warm. But hey, at 2 a.m., when your thoughts are looping like a Victorian monologue about mortality, placebo might be just fine. Another favorite? Hop pillows. Dried hop flowers, yes, the same plant used in brewing beer, were sewn into small linen pouches and placed beneath the pillow. The scent was said to lull the nervous and settle the overworked. You'd find these in the bedrooms of gentlewomen, aging clerks, and even in hospitals for convalescents. And then there was vinegar foot soaking before bed. Imagine this: you standing barefoot in a small wooden tub, water warm and slightly pungent, your toes wriggling beneath the surface. Advocates claimed it drew heat downward, away from the brain, reducing nightmares and excessive thoughts. We might now call that grounding. But the most dramatic sleep aid of the time wasn't herbal at all. It was chloral hydrate, a chemical sedative introduced in the late 1860s, sold in tinctures, powders, and pre-mixed sleep drops. Chloral was the melatonin of its day, with a side of danger. It knocked you out, all right, but tolerance built quickly, too much, and the line between sleep and coma blurred uncomfortably. Poets, doctors, and exhausted mothers used it. Charles Dickens is rumored to have dabbled. One diary from 1872 reads, "Took 2 drops more than needed, slept through the storm, and the birth of baby James." Yikes. Still, before the age of pharmaceuticals, people relied on what they had: kitchen herbs, quiet rituals, and hope. One lesser known folk remedy was the midnight onion. Cut in half and placed beside the bed, it was thought to absorb toxins from the room and sponge away bad dreams. You might chuckle, but there are records of entire tenement floors reeking of onion on humid nights, with mothers whispering, "Don't move it, dear, it's taking your sadness." Maybe they were onto something, or maybe it was just a comfort, like a dream catcher made of kitchen scraps. Then came ritual foods. You didn't just eat dinner, you prepared your body for rest. In England, warm barley porridge with honey. In Germany, soft bread with poppy seed syrup. In the American South, milk thickened with cornstarch and flavored with nutmeg. A sleepy little custard that clung to your ribs like a lullaby. Each dish a message to the body. It's safe now. You've done enough. Let go. Sleep advice also found its way into books, lectures, and even etiquette manuals. A popular 1884 guidebook suggested that one should avoid intellectual labor after tea, lest the brain become inflamed and overactive at bedtime. Another advised a strict no-drama rule: do not retire with arguments unfinished or novels incomplete. The mind abhors cliffhangers. We still do, don't we? Even the act of undressing for bed became ceremonial. Clothes were layered carefully on the back of a chair, jewelry, if any, removed in a specific order. In some houses, slippers faced east, superstition mingled with habit, creating a kind of sleepy choreography. And here's a delightful quirk. In some towns, the local apothecary would deliver custom sleep sachets weekly, much like a milkman. Lavender, valerian, dried rose petals, all pressed into small cloth pouches labeled with your name. Some were sewn into nightgowns, others simply clutched like a charm. Was it science? No, but it was care, intention, a sign that someone, maybe even just you, was looking out for your nighttime peace. We often think of our ancestors as grim or hard-edged, but look closer and you'll see they were trying, just like you, trying to find sleep in a world that often felt too fast, too loud, too uncertain. Sound familiar? Even now, people are brewing sleep teas, spritzing lavender sprays, scrolling for relaxing rain videos at 3 a.m. We haven't changed all that much. We still chase rest like a moth drawn to a flickering porch light. We want quiet. We want dreams. We want, most of all, to feel okay closing our eyes. And so you, tucked under your own covers, can smile gently at these odd old methods. Whether it's onion halves, lettuce tea, or hot vinegar water, each one was a whispered message to the night. I am still here. I need rest. So go ahead, tuck yourself in a little tighter. The remedies may have changed, but the longing, that's timeless. Now, finally, you arrive at the soft close of the trail where midnight deepens into a hush, and all the candlelit fretting of the 19th century bedroom fades into background warmth. You're not quite asleep, maybe, but your thoughts have softened, loosened, spread like warm tea across the surface of your mind. And before you drift completely, we'll pause with one last layer, the meaning of sleep, as it was once understood, not just as rest, but as reflection, spirituality, and at times, something almost mystical. Back then, people didn't always think of sleep as a biological switch that flips off and on. No, it was something symbolic, even sacred, a liminal state between life and death, a temporary death that visited nightly, and a miracle of rebirth every morning. Each morning is a resurrection, wrote a preacher in 1846. We rise, rebodied, resouled, touched again by breath. That's some heavy morning energy for someone who probably slept on straw. Victorians kept dream journals, not just for entertainment, but for guidance. Dreams weren't meaningless static. They were messages sent from the subconscious, yes, but also many believed from the divine. A warning, a blessing, a sign. And if the dream was vivid enough, or strange enough, it might be shared at the breakfast table with the same weight as a weather report. One diarist noted, dreamed of green fields beyond the mill house. Mother says we shall have guests. No word on whether guests arrived, but the trust in the symbolism, that's the important bit. Dream interpretation was a kind of folk language. Snakes meant transformation. Teeth falling out signaled grief. Flying, that one was divine favor, or indigestion, depending on who you asked. Historians still argue whether these symbols came from ancient oral traditions or early psychology trickling through from Europe. Either way, people believed in the narrative power of sleep, and belief, as we've learned, is half the recipe for rest. There's also the more haunting side. Sleep is vulnerability. You had to be careful where and how you slept. Locked doors, covered mirrors. In some places, shoes had to point away from the bed, lest evil spirits follow your footprints. Babies were blessed before naps. Lovers were whispered over while they slept, and the dead were described as only sleeping. It's oddly comforting. In a world where death was a daily companion, sleep was a little rehearsal, a safe one. And yes, there were fears too, of sleep paralysis, which some called the witch's ride. You'd wake up unable to move and swear someone or something was pressing down on your chest. In New England, they blamed it on witches. In London, it was the devil's weight. And in Germany, the phenomenon had its own folkloric visitor, the Nachtmar, or nightmare, a goblin-like thing that sat on your ribcage. Science didn't explain it well until the 20th century, so for centuries people just dealt with it. Maybe you said a prayer. Maybe you kept a pouch of rosemary near your pillow. Maybe you just tried not to think about it at all. That's the thing about sleep in the 1800s. It was never just physical. It was cultural, emotional, and even cosmic. It meant something. And then there were the rituals of waking, just as precise and curious as the rituals of rest. People believed you shouldn't leap from bed too quickly. Your spirit, they said, needed time to catch up. Stretch, pray, breathe, bathe. Only then could the soul re-enter fully. Even morning light was spiritual. A single sunbeam was believed to carry divine energy. Some households flung open the curtains first thing, not just to banish dark, but to invite life itself in. You might smile at that, here in the age of blackout curtains and sunrise alarms. But maybe there's something beautiful about it, about the idea that sleep, in its deepest form, reconnects us with rest, with self, with something unseen. And in that spirit, let's wind down gently now. Maybe you're lying in the dark, your room hushed, except for the tick of some old clock or the soft whoosh of the fan. Maybe you're curled on your side, the covers cool but comforting, your face turned toward the pillow, and maybe, just maybe, you feel a little closer to those 19th century souls, not because of the medicine or the moon milk or the stuffed hot pillows, but because, like them, you're simply trying to pause, to be, to rest in a world that doesn't always make it easy. Let them rest with you tonight, those long gone insomniacs, their worries folded under starched collars, their eyelids heavy from candles and tinctures. Let them pass quietly, their dreams sewn into the seams of old feather mattresses. And now, as your body slackens and your thoughts begin to dissolve, let this final moment drift into silence. The story slows here. You've arrived, not at the end exactly, but at the place where stories melt into silence, where time softens like wax near a flame, where even your breath has slowed to match the gentle rhythm of the dark. All around you, the night holds its breath. The world doesn't need you for a while. No more lists, no more checking, no more remembering what comes next. That can all wait. You are cocooned in a quiet that people have sought for centuries. That hush at the edge of dreams. That stillness that feels a little like floating. The linen beneath you is warm now, shaped gently to your body. The air is cool but not cold, and your arms feel as though they're wrapped in sleep itself. There is nothing to prove here. No thoughts that can't wait till morning. No fears that have any weight in this gentle dark. Let yourself drift. Let your thoughts scatter like dandelion seeds, floating, soft, slow. Let the sounds fade into hush. Let the last of your muscles unclench, your jaw soften, your breath deepen. There's nothing more to hear, nothing more to understand, just the quiet rhythm of your own body and the sense that in this moment you are safe, you are allowed to rest, and so you will. Good night, traveler of strange dreams and stranger remedies. May your rest be deep, your dreams be kind, and your heart be quiet, even if just for tonight. Sleep well.